Okay, so this month we made the Tessuti Chiara pants in our Rainy fabric. They're a nice wide leg trouser, perfect weight for the summer, and so there's no pockets, side zip, side concealed zip. So yeah. So this morning I'm going to make the Chiara pants by Tessuti patterns. They're a nice wide leg trouser pattern, as you can see from the front there, and that's the line drawing there. So the first thing it wants you to do is obviously to cut your fabric out. Make sure you mark your notches and the point, the dart point and the dart legs, which I'll show you in a minute. Then it wants you to interface your waistbands. So that's your front waistband and your back waistband. There, so that's the front and that's the back, so they're cut on the fold and then interface. And I have neatened, overlocked the lower edge of my waistband, because it's a waistband facing, so it's a grown on waistband with a waistband facing, and I've overlocked the edge of that because I don't want to turn it under and then stitch, because it will just make it more of a ridge. So I just feel it will lie flatter across my tummy if I just overlock those. So I've done that. So I prefer not to use the Violin Shield. I prefer to use bias tape and edge tape here. So I'll show you how I've applied that. So I don't use the Violin Shield, but I can explain to you as we go along where you would use it. So I use the bias binding tape along the top edge of the trouser, so along the top edge here, the waistband edge. Okay, I use the bias tape there just to stop that from stretching out. Do that on all of the waistband pieces, the two fronts and the two backs. And then where the zip's going to go, it asks you to put in a piece of Violin Shield, this one here, down where your zip's going to go. But I prefer to use edge tape, just because I prefer to keep that reinforcement in the zip, whereas the Violin Shield, you sew it in, and then once you put the zip in, you sort of tear it away and take it out and remove it. But I just prefer that reinforcement there on the zip to stay there, so I use edge tape along there. So I've done that. So the zip's going to be on the left hand side, so I've done it to the left front and the left back, just along that side seam there where the zip's going to go. So that's all those done. The other thing they want you to do is to neaten your edges. So you can either zigzag stitch, I've overlocked around mine, so they want you to do the crotch seams of the fronts and the backs, and both the side seams and the inseams of both your fronts and your backs. So I've done all of those. And then it wants you to sew the darts in. So I've got my tailor's tack there where my dart point is. This is the front, I believe, yeah. So this is the front of the trousers, and I've marked my dart point there, and I've just snipped in, I snip into the edge of the fabric just at the dart legs there, and then the dart legs there, and then mark in the dart point at the bottom there with a small tailor's tack. So once I've got those in place, I have to think about this because my fabric, I'm using a nice Rainy fabric, which has been nice, perfect for sort of summer weather, the spring and summer when it's coming, when it arrives here in the UK. I have just put a pin in the wrong side of my fabric, so I can just keep track of that. And because I overlocked my edges, I just with chalk marked in where my notches are for lining up later. So I just marked all those in with chalk. So there where the dart legs are there, just going to fold those two together, lining those up. It's just a very small dart on the front, but it does give a nice little bit of shaping, so that's good. That there, and then pin right at the point, fold and pin at the point of your dart point. Fingers and thumbs this morning, right, and then between there, like so. Okay, so then we're going to mark that with a chalk pen. I'll put some of this. So we're just going to draw from the top there where your dart leg is down to the dart point. Hopefully that mark on there you'll be able to see. There we go. So we've just drawn that in there like so. Alright, so we're going to stitch from there, back stitch, stitch to the end, and then just stitch off the end where the dart point is, and then I'll tie my threads rather than back stitching, because if you back stitch it'll just make them too pointy. You can sometimes turn and then stitch up the folded edge, but I just think on this fabric it's better that I don't. It just will make it a bit more bulky, so I'm just going to tie the threads off at the end. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing with this one, and then mark my dart in. So from the dart leg there. Okay, that's those there. Okay, so that's those two done. So that's the two fronts. Okay, so then we'll do those. I'll give those a press, and then we're going to do the left side seam to put the concealed zip in. Okay, so that's the dart sewn in. Okay, that's the back dart there, and then it's pressed towards the side seam. Okay, and that's the front dart, again pressed towards the side seam. So next it wants us to join your left side seam together where your zip's going to go. So you just need to line up matching your notches. You've got a notch there for where your zipper stop will end up. So I'll pin that there. Just line it nicely at the top. And then it wants us to stitch up the side seam, and it wants you to, so a long basting stitch from, what you should do, a basting stitch from where your zip's going to go at the top here, right down to about 2 inches past where your zipper notch is, the notch in the side here, so about 2 inches past there, which is there. Measured it, so I know that's there. What I tend to do is put a pin both ways like that. So if I've got a pin there, that marks where I need. So I'm going to use a basting stitch down to there, then change to a normal stitch and just stitch, back stitch, and then stitch all the way to the bottom, all the way to the hem. Okay, so I'm going to go and stitch that next. Obviously I'll pin it in place first, and then I'm going to go and stitch that. Press the seam open, and then we will put the concealed zip in. Okay, so we've got our side seam stitched in place. So stitch normal stitch length, and then when I get to my mark in here, I've just done a long basting stitch, and then I've pressed that open. So next we just need to measure down from the top edge here your 3/8 of an inch seam allowance there. So I've just measured that in and just marked it with a chalk there, okay, for your 3/8 of an inch, because that's where you're going to want your, there it is, zipper stops to sit. So you're going to place it now on this pressed open seam. You're going to place your zipper tape, your zip, right side down. This is the right side of your concealed zip, so you're going to place that down onto the pressed open seam there, and then you want to pin your zip to that seam allowance in there. So just making sure that that plastic stopper at the top of your zip, and I'll show you. So your plastic stopper there at the top of your zip needs to be lined up with the, so that sits just underneath your 3/8 of an inch seam allowance you've just marked. So there. So positioning your zipper teeth centrally to that seam allowance, to that seam. You're just going to pin that in place down there. So then we're going to use a normal zipper foot initially to just, it says base stitch, but I just normally stitch it on with a normal stitch because I think it reinforces the zip, particularly in trousers. Just gives that extra strength in case your first row of stitching comes undone, then you've always got the next one. So then we're going to pin it to the other side. You're just pinning it just to your seam allowance. You could always, if you're not sure, you could always then tack it in place before you stitch it, if you just want to make sure that that's all correct. But you can just literally baste, you can use a basting stitch if you're not sure, and then it's easy to take out. But I just tend to stitch it normally. I think it helps to reinforce the zip. So we're going to go and stitch that in with a normal zipper foot first, and then we'll use the concealed zipper foot next. Okay, so this is my normal zipper foot. Okay, just with your two edges there. So I'm going to use that initially. So I just need to adjust my stitch, my needle position. So this one, so it moves over to the side there a bit, and then we are just going to stitch You can't move the zipper head out of the way at this point because you've got your seam basted. So I've just got it folded, everything folded out the way over to that side, and then I'm just going to stitching through the seam allowance bit here and the zipper tape. As I say, you could do it with a basting stitch. I prefer to do it with a normal stitch. I just feel it reinforces. You've got two lines of stitching then on your zip. So it just particularly on trousers, I think it's a good idea. It is recording. To flip it over and do the other side, so I just need to move my needle position again on my foot to do that. To that side. The most difficult bit is getting around this top of the This is the way I always do a concealed zip, whether it's on trousers, a dress or anything. So by basting it, particularly if you're doing a dress and you've got to match up seams, anything like that, you can make sure that those seams are all lined up, and then you don't end up putting your zip together and it's all off on a wonk, as it were. Want a better word. So that's just that stitch to the tape at the moment, like that. Okay, so I'm just going to cut my thread ends. Thread ends near a zip, if you can help it. So that's it, just stitched to the seam allowance like that. Okay, so next we want to remove our basting stitches down the centre here. Gosh. Once you get going, it's quite easy to do. So just remove those. All right, so I'm going to just remove those. All right, and then we'll put the concealed zip in. Okay, so having undone your basting stitches on your zip, that's the kind of scenario you've got at the moment. Okay, don't panic, that's all quite normal. So you've got it positioned. This is where you've allowed for your seam allowance to join up to there. So that's as we are at the moment. So then you want to get your you need a concealed zipper foot, which has 2 grooves along the bottom there. Okay, yeah, 2 grooves like that. Okay, and that's where your zip sits in. So if we undo that like that and have it like that, then that is where your teeth and get it in properly like this. It's funny because it's not on the flat machine. There we go. So your teeth will sit inside your, up into that groove underneath there. Okay, so we'll put that on the machine. And then you're going to lay it down like this with these zipper teeth uppermost, and then you want to get those zipper teeth into that groove on the foot there. Oops, need to move that into the middle. There we go. So let's just back stitch a wee bit. To make sure that's up inside there properly. Looks like it is. And I'm just going to stitch it on there. You can get as far as you can get to. You won't be able to get all the way to the bottom because your zip pull will be in the way. Just back stitch a little bit. Pull that off. And then that has stitched really close to your zipper teeth there. Okay, so we're going to do exactly the same with the other side. I've got my threads to put off there. Must have some there. Do try and keep your threads trimmed when you do your zip, because otherwise you can quite easily get them caught in your in the teeth of the zip. So you don't want to have him put your zip in lovely and then get it caught in the get your thread caught in the teeth. So I've just got it in the opposite groove now of this concealed zipper foot. Stitch along there. So your teeth naturally want to roll over a bit. Just try and just bring them so that they're just a little bit upright. And again, you'll only be able to get as far as you can get to. Back stitch. Okay, I'll pull that out the teeth. Pull the teeth out of there rather. So then that should it. So you have got this scenario at the bottom bit here, so we'll sort that out in a minute. But then if you zip that up there, that's your concealed zip. Okay, so now we're going to sort out this bit at the bottom here. So you do your zip up and then you change back over to your normal zipper foot. So back over to this one. Side, and then you're going to want to, so from where you managed to stitch with the concealed zipper foot, so I've managed to stitch just down to there, okay, you want to now stitch your seam, so keeping that folded over out of the way, you want to start just back a bit from where you finished. You want to just back stitch and then stitch along to meet up with your seam allowance down here. Of course, I've got black thread on a black, so it's quite difficult to see. So as close as you can get, just trying to keep that all out of the way. Down so that you meet the other seam allowance that you stitched earlier. And just back stitch a little bit. Off, trim your threads. Really important to trim your thread, especially around a zip. As I say, you don't want them getting, see, I haven't quite managed to line it up, but I can't quite get into there with that zipper foot, so we'll see what that's like. I'm quite happy with that. So there you are. You see, so that's sorted out that bottom bit there. Okay, so that's your concealed zip in place. So now we'll go and stitch the other side seam on the trousers, and then it's the inseams, I think. Okay, for some reason that wasn't recording. So you've got one leg in the right way and then one leg in the wrong way. You put one leg inside the other, and then you can line up your crotch seam. So you line it up there, and then at the top, and line it up. You've got a notch here, so on your back seam, so line that one up. And line that up at the top. So we're going to stitch around that crotch seam with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then press that seam open. So just make sure those are lined properly. Here we go, I can't pin it with an angle. Right, there we go. So then that's the crotch seam pinned in place. Okay, so you've got one trouser leg inside the other, so you've got right sides together. Okay, and then I'm going to stitch around that crotch seam at 1/2 inch seam allowance and press that seam open, and then we are going to do the waist facing piece. Yeah. Okay, so then we need to stitch the right side of our waistband facing. I've just stitched the left, but we need to stitch the right. So you want, the easiest way to think about it is to think, I put a pin in the front, so that's your front and that's your back, and that's the way that will be your right side, because it will be on the inside of the garment, so it will be facing up that way. Okay, so you want to stitch 1/2 inch seam allowance down that right side, press the seam open, and then we're going to join it to the waistline. Okay, so I've stitched that side seam of the facing and pressed that open. So then you want to just make sure that that all fits correctly, because then it wants you to trim off the left side end of the facing where the zip's going to be, but I would just roughly pin that round to make sure that it's all going to line up first, which it does tell you to do in the instructions. So that notch lines up with there, yep. That notch lines up with the side seam there. That notch lines up with there, and then that lines up with there. So yeah, so that's correct, that side. I'll just check this side. It lines up with there, that lines up with there. That one lines up there, and that you just want to take off. Yeah. So you just think it, so as long as that sort of lines up correctly, what it wants you to do is just trim off 1/2 inch down the sides of the facing that you haven't. Stitch down the sides of the facing that you haven't yet sewn. So you're going to trim those down 1/2 inch, that's that side, and then the same again for that side. Okay, and then I'm going to open up the zip. It wants to go right over to, you want to line that edge up along with that overlapping your zip. So let me just try and show that a bit clearer. So you want right sides together, and then you're going to lay that edge over the top of where the zip is there and align that along that seam allowance, and then you're going to stitch that in place down there, I'll keep pinning, at 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm sure it's 1/4 inch. Just check. Yeah. Yeah, so you're going to stitch down there at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to do exactly the same on the other side. Okay, so you're going to stitch that down there so that then when that folds out over to the right way, then that's enclosed with the zip there. Okay, so we're going to go and stitch that first, 1/4 inch seam allowance down both of those sides, and then we're going to attach all the way around the top. Okay. Okay, so that's stitched in place down like that there, so that then when it folds over to the right way in a minute, that's how it seals it in. Okay, so you want to then right sides together, go around and stitch, pin your waistband in place. So match your side seams of your waistband with your other side seam, and then you've got notches there. Notch in your waistband there will join up with the dart there. So see if you can get it pinned in, there we go. And then just pin that in place in between, just to make sure it's sitting nice and even. Again there. And then on here you'll have a notch in the centre of your waistband that'll join your centre back seam. And the same on the front. And then you'll have a notch that will join up with your dart. Check that your dart legs are pressed the right way still. Saves fiddling about with them later. So I usually pin them in place. So I usually pin the dart leg facing towards the side seam as you pressed it earlier. And then that one joins up with that one. Again, press that dart leg towards the side seam. And then when you get to this and get to the side here, that should naturally want to fold over like that. Okay, so your zip is going to fold over at the moment back on itself like that, which then when you turn it out will all be in the right way a bit later on, but that will or should fold over that way like so. Okay, so I'm going to go and stitch that at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then we just trim the top here where we've got where we need to the corner, and then turn it in the right way, and then we're going to understitch along that facing. Okay, so I've stitched around there, okay, the top there, and then I've just trimmed off the corners. I'll probably do with a little bit more actually. Trimmed off the corner there, and then I've also just graded the seam, so I've just trimmed down slightly. Just trim down slightly the seam allowance of the waistband facing. Okay, all the way around, trim the other corner, and then we can turn that in the right way. Like so then that's going to turn over to the right way like that. So what I want to do now is to press the seam allowance towards the facing and then understitch along that edge there all the way around. Okay, you won't be able to get right up into the corner, but as far as you can, you're just going to understitch that, the seam allowance to the facing. Okay, so we'll do that next. Okay, so that's what I mean by the edge stitching. So literally along that edge, so you stitched your seam allowance up towards the facing. And that way, then when you fold that over, it folds it over to the wrong side, so you don't see your seam doesn't roll out. Okay, so I'm going to give that a press over to the inside. So you want to make sure that your other side seam lines up at the other side. There. Okay, and then you're just going to give that all a press and pin that in place around. I'll show you when I've done that. Okay, so pressed all that over to the wrong side there. Okay, so you're just making sure that that edge you've got just slightly rolls, your edge stitch, your understitching rolls over to the underside. Okay, and now I'm going to stitch all the way around this edge, right around to the other side. And I'm also going to stitch the hems that I tacked up earlier. So I'm also going to stitch those around. Okay, so, and that's the pants finished. So I'll show you when I've done those.